Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Followerpodcast in our series, Saturate. If you're not sure what Saturate is, real quick, we've got the series going on where we're in a time in history where we have this massive opportunity to rebuild the kind of world that our Bible talks about, that our faith helps us dream about. And one of the ways we can do that is by recognizing that the Spirit of God is moving us away from this kind of meeting mentality. Not that meetings are unimportant, but we're shifting from this place where we thought it was all about just gathering in a building. And now we're moving to this place where, just like Jesus talks about being salt and light in the world, we have this opportunity to infiltrate all the different spheres of society. And so what we're doing in this series is I'm having a conversation with people who live out their faith in different spheres of society. And they see their particular place of work as their mission field. This is the place that they believe God has called them to be and to serve. And today we have on the Follower Podcast with us my very good friend, Dean Cothill. Welcome, Dean.
Hey, Matt. Thank you so much, bro. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really, really good, man. And it's really, really good to have you on Follow Podcast. And yeah, thanks for making the time. I know you're busy with everything that's going on. You've got no shortage of stuff to do. So I really appreciate you being here.
It is honestly my absolute pleasure, man. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a privilege to do that. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you don't know Dean, you'll get to. He kind of works in. He'll tell us a bit more about this as we go, but he works in the kind of bridges the gap between the world of church and the world of media and communication. And so very involved in that space, and really, in a lot of ways, I would say, in terms of the people that I know, Dean is really leading the way in a lot of the thinking, at least in the spheres and the circles that I'm a part of. So really excited for what he's got to share. Dean, I was thinking a little bit about our first encounters as I was preparing for our conversation today. And I was thinking how far back our friendship goes. I actually don't know. I don't know how many years. I don't know if you know the years.
I was actually also doing the maths. It's about 14 years, eh?
14 years that we've known each other. That's crazy, man. And then I think, Dean, when I look at you then, and just over the years, things I've observed about you, I think you're an influencer in the truest sense, and not an influencer just in the superficial sense of how many Instagram followers do you have, of which you have many. But the point is, you've always been this kind of person who is not afraid to step out and take the big risk, think the big thought, dream the big dream. And you have this ability of bringing people with you. I think that's really, really great. And one of the things I've always learned from you is that you really do love people. You have this desire for people to really flourish. So you have this ability to kind of not use people for things, but use things for people. And I just love that you have that skill about yourself. And one of the questions that I thought would be helpful for our audience listening, and one of the things I'm also genuinely interested in, is the kind of life that makes that person. So I guess tell us a little bit about the world that made Dean Cothill Dean Cothill. How did you grow up? Where are you from? Give us a sense of your background a bit.
What makes Dean Cothill? I try and think about that on a regular basis to try and make sure that I'm keeping myself accountable to whoever I think God is making me on a daily basis, and whatever that means moving forward. And I must be honest, I hope this doesn't sound ridiculous, but to hear you say, like, Dean, I think you're an influencer, is actually a surprise to me. Because if I was completely vulnerable with you and your audience, my deepest fear is that I actually don't fit in, that I actually don't belong. And what I've had to the self-awareness game and the coming to grips with who I am in God and Christian game is that there is a part of me that leans into that in the communities that I find myself in, because I know that I don't want anyone else to feel that way.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So a large part of my personality, a large part of who I am, was birthed in that place. Before 18, 19, I think we met, I was 19 or 20 years old at the time. And we've kind of gone from there.
And in that time, a lot happened. You got married. You have 2 little children running around. Tell us a bit about them.
Yeah. My wife, I met Alzan when around the same time, 1920. Just for some brownie points, she was my boss. So I dated my boss. And we got married quite young as to kind of world standards. We were 21. I'm going to lift this up so you can kind of see. There's Daniel and Alzan.
Oh, beautiful.
And there's us.
Was that first picture on the best beach ever in the history of the world, ever since the beginning of beach?
That is the best beach in the history of the whole world, Sardinia Bay, right here in Port Elizabeth.
Yeah, that beach.
I got married in George. You were there. You led worship at our wedding.
With what is arguably the worst hairstyle. You sent me a picture of that the other day. I was like, what?
We have photos, bro.
Actually
we have photos.
Happened. Oh my gosh.
But have you seen my hair at my own wedding? It's equally as trashy.
Yeah, so anyway, back to the beautiful wedding and not the bad hair.
Let's get back to your podcast and not lose people here. So, I finished school and actually had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I went to England for 6 months, played a bit of rugby, and then came back to Benoni, met Alzan, we got married. I got my honors degree in theology and then was ready to kind of literally become a minister, plans kind of changed a little bit. There wasn't real space to kind of grow in the Methodist Church at the time, and the timing wasn't really on. My wife was finishing her master's degree in psychology, but my time at the Methodist Church had kind of ended. So I took a swing in the dark and applied for a teaching position at a school, and that lasted 18 months. In that 18-month period, and it's weird to say this, my Instagram life took off. That kind of sparked a big thing in me. I started off with a few hundred followers, and then that kind of landed me in a few thousand, and then it just really took off. We got a friend of mine, Craig, and I got a few international jobs, and that really set us up. And so we had our own little business for about 3 years.
And then that journey led you to the place where you are now, where you kind of using that media skill set that you developed over this time, but in the church world. Tell us a little bit about that work and what you do there.
Yeah. When I do every part of me, I didn't ever think I would be back in the church. Honestly, I had the greatest job. Was doing a lot of traveling, was all over the place, free meals, free plane tickets, 5-star hotels, massive clients from Huawei to BMW to tourism boards in Europe. But one Sunday morning, I'll never ever forget, my wife and I woke up and I just said, I think we need to go to church today. And we ended up going to Father's House Church, sang along, had decent coffee, and went home. That evening, though, based on the meetings that we had with a few people, the lead pastor, Giorgio, actually DM'd me on Instagram and said, "Hey, how's it, man? I heard you were at church. I would love to have coffee with you." And I was like, yeah, okay, let's go for coffee. Went for coffee that Thursday, what was supposed to be. And I remember, do you remember me sending you that voice note?
Yeah, I remember that. I was in the airport. I've been praying for you just the day before. And I was in the airport waiting to catch a flight because I was coming back from something I was doing, I can't even remember, somewhere. And I remember getting that voice note, and I actually remember sitting in the airport and just being so grateful to God because I could hear what was happening in your heart off the back of that time.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was a 2.5 hour conversation with George. about 2 or 3 weeks later, he offered me a job as the creative director for Father's House. It was a very significant moment. And yeah, we are just about November will be 3 years. Crazy. So going on about 3 years. It's an incredible combination of all the things that I genuinely love in the world. Media and ministry somehow living together.
Yeah. And bro, underneath all this, so we've spoken a little bit about your external and the things you do and the journey that got you there. But underneath all this and animating that is your friendship with Jesus. And I know that's not like a cut and dry thing for you. I know that's been an up and down journey. Give us some insight into that. Who is Jesus for you? What does that look like?
Yeah, up and down is a nice way of putting it. When I started to reintegrate into the Christian community, because God can do something in your heart, but it takes other people a few weeks or months to kind of come to grips with what that thing looks like. So God's salvation is always personal, but it takes a while to be filtered into the community. You know, Paul had his kicked off a donkey moment, but it took some time for the other oaks to go, okay, jeepers, okay, there's something happening. There's something going on here.
Yeah.
So when people used to ask me what's going on, where are you in this world? Why is this happening? One of the big things is Jesus is one of the most frustrating people in the world to me. He is annoyingly relentless in his absolute love for me.
So good.
And that is deeply, deeply annoying.
Yeah.
And that is deeply, deeply calming and satisfying. And so every part of me wants to, day by day, minute by minute, breath by breath, come to grips with this love that this Jesus has for me. And in turn, this love that he has for my neighbor. And so one of the fundamental things for me is Jesus is the kindest person I know. And if you can show me somebody kinder, I would be really interested to have that conversation. But he is the kindest person I know, and that drastically influences the way I go about living my life. He has been so good to me and the people in my life that I honestly don't know where I would be without him. And so that is the posture of my heart. That is the attitude of my spirit as I live my life, that I would love as he loves me.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I love about you, bro, is that you haven't allowed anything to go wasted. And so God brought you through this journey that would have seemed from the outside to be this kind of wilderness space. In some ways it was, but in that way, in that place, you picked up the very skill set that he would then use in a later space for you to give voice to really some of your vocational purpose in the world. And I think what I love is, we were just having a conversation now about how you see the digital space as a kind of tabernacle. And your desire really is to use the digital space to host the presence of God, you know. So tell us a little bit about that thought.
Yeah, I think it was about, it was a few weeks into me having been at church and a few weeks of me being in the space at church, where I tried to kind of get these creative team nights going, these creative just gatherings of things. And we were sitting there and then just started talking about the church and where we kind of see the creative world going. And George just kind of leant over to me and said, what do you think? Where do you think this is going? Where do you think the creative world is headed? And I'll never forget the moment. It's as if I got hit by an absolute truck. That God showed Exodus 31 to me, and it feels like I I sound like a broken record every time I bring this up, because I feel like people, when we get into these sorts of conversations, I genuinely believe that this is fundamentally needs to be our starting point whenever we get into any of this stuff, is the basic question of who was the first person in the Bible to receive the Holy Spirit. And there's, to a certain degree, lots of debate around who we think it could be. But if we follow the trajectory of the scriptures, we see in Exodus 31 that God says to Moses, "See, I've chosen Bezalel, and I've put my spirit on him to do creative works." And if you follow through the passage there, you see that it's to do work with gemstones and work with fabrics, and to build a tabernacle and to build a temple. And he goes into lots of details around woodwork, and as if it happened yesterday, this moment hit me in my chest, that God's Spirit, if we were to push that piece of scripture up 2,000 years, that God's Spirit is on us to live in that creative world. So if we were to use different language, people who work with fabrics, who are they? They're designers, they're interior designers, they're fashion designers. Those are creative worlds. People who work with wood or gemstones or gold or silver, these are creative people. And if we go into the Hebrew, here's another little part of history, part of the little nerd that lives in me, is the Hebrew of it. There is the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God. And that phrase, those two words together, the Ruach Elohim, is only found in 3 places in the Hebrew scriptures. And 2 places it's used to describe the Spirit of God that is on Bezalel, a few chapters later in Exodus. And the only other place that it is found is in Genesis 1, when the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. It is the same. It is the same Spirit that was there at the beginning of creation, is the same Spirit that was on Bezalel, is the same Spirit that is on each of us.
Come on.
When we come to grips with what it means for us to create. And so fundamentally for me, I believe that we were created to create. All of who we are in God's image, that Imago Dei, is we were and have been created to create. So as designers, as influencers, as Instagrammers, as Zoomers, as the kind of, thanks to COVID, everybody's Zooming now. We have been created to create. And my first and foremost prayer is, God, allow me to come to grips with what it means to have your Spirit on me as I create.
So good. So good, bro. And so that's your journey, and you're kind of walking this road, and it's business as usual, and you're following the path of God. And then COVID-19, right? I don't know about you, bro. This came out of absolutely nowhere for me, and it's turned the world upside down. But I see the hand of God in it. I can't help but see the hand of God in it. I think we're living in unprecedented times where we're standing on the cusp. For those of us who have eyes to see, we're standing on the cusp of the opportunity for real renewal within the life of the church and through the church to the world. I think we can genuinely, if we are intentional about it, if we don't just allow ourselves to drift with the current of the norm again, I think we can build something beautiful in the wake of this. And speaking now specifically to people who are listening to that and going, yes, that's my desire. I'm inspired by all this. Give me the Spirit. Hit me with that Bezalel stuff. I want to use my influence, and I want to use my creativity, and I want to be a part of what God is doing off the back of COVID. Maybe share some thoughts with us that may be helpful to those people who find themselves in the sphere of communication and media and that space. And I really love that picture that you give, bro, in terms of thinking about this as building a tabernacle and then filling it with the presence of God. Give us, on 2 levels, share with us about your personal journey and how you're navigating this just as a person in your friendship with Jesus that may be helpful for people in that space. And then share with us vocationally. So as a creator, as a communications person, someone who's an influencer within the media world, what are you seeing? What opportunities are you seeing? What calls, what responsibilities, what big steps of courage and guts do we need to have to step in some new directions? Give us just some insights into your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think this is something that not only came way out of left field. Nobody was prepared for this. Nobody saw this coming. I think there's large degrees of fear and uncertainty for a lot of people. South Africans in particular, I think we're day 12 of the lockdown. I think we're seeing Europe and America come to grips with obscene numbers around what this thing is doing to hospitals and states, and closures to universities and schools. And I think there's lots of fear and anxiety that's currently running around. Loneliness and depression was a thing before we were told to self-isolate and stay at home. So I think so many people are experiencing a lot of those fears and anxieties. So myself personally, here at home, there's lots of fear and there's lots of anxiety, and even chatting to family and chatting to friends, there's just uncertainty around where to go. What are we going to do? Where does this thing end? What is our president going to do? What's going to happen to the rand? Lots of that sort of talk. But I must echo what you said there. I do see God doing something here. There is. Let me take a step back. God didn't do this.
Sure.
It wasn't a God moment. God is not punishing anybody. God is not forcing his hand. God is not a whip or a ruler at the top who's now forcing people to do certain things, and is not punishing a particular people group. But in the midst of this chaos, I do believe that it is our responsibility to, like you're saying there, eyes to see and ears to hear. God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And what is my responsibility in this space?
Yeah.
And so in the midst of all of that, objectively, I don't think I've ever spent 3 weeks alone with my wife and my family.
Yeah.
I saw an interview of, I think it was, I stand corrected, maybe some of your audience can help us in the comments. I think it was Virat Kohli who had an interview with somebody who said the longest time he's ever spent together with his wife was 4 or 5 days.
Sheesh.
Together before he had to go to another cricket tournament or training camp.
Yeah.
Now they're sitting on week 2 or 3 where they've just been together.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah.
My wife and I have never spent 2 weeks alone together at home. So come Thursday, that'll be our 2 weeks. And we've got another week together. For me, that is a wonderful thing. Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I'm frazzled. Yes, I've got more work than I know what to do with. The days are long. The hours, Daniel is up first thing in the morning and guns blazing. But I do believe God's doing something here in me, and I do believe God's doing something in the church. Of the amount of conversations that I've had with people who 3 weeks ago, people were going, should we be doing online? Should we be in online church? How do we do this? Should we buy a camera? I don't know if we should get a camera. Yes, listen, we're there now.
Yeah.
I think it's Carrie Newhoff has said, something I'm paraphrasing here. Crisis has this ability of slingshotting people forward. In one of the podcasts I listened to that he was talking about on his blog, is he was saying COVID has slingshotted the church into the digital age. Yeah. Almost as if some people are like, nah, it's not going to stick around. Nah, we shouldn't do this. Nah, we should do. We're all there now. Literally, we're all there.
Yeah.
And so from a church point of view, we need to reimagine. We need to be re-inspired. We need to come to grips with a new way that God is doing it. And I was actually typing a blog post now before you called in Isaiah, where God streams in the desert. See, I'm doing a new thing. Isaiah 43, help me.
Yeah, I think it's 43. I read it the other morning,
actually. 19.
Yeah.
I'm doing a new thing. And the image there that I got there is a lot of us feel that we're in the desert. A lot of us feel that so much has been taken away from us. A lot of us feel that our hands are now tied. A lot of us feel that we haven't got our freedom, or we can't get out, or we can't do things the way we used to do things. And I genuinely believe that God wants to show us rivers in this wasteland.
Yeah, man.
That what we perceive to be desert, dry places, that God actually wants to show us rivers.
Yeah.
That if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, there is a river in this place. The interesting thing about deserts is we don't dream in deserts, do we?
Yeah.
In deserts, we think, hey, this is the end. In deserts, we're actually about minimum and minimalistic kind of mentality, because I need to make sure that I can make it to my next meal.
Or just to this like survival instinct, yeah.
Proper survival mode, proper panic at the disco mode, and actually more panic, no disco.
Yeah.
So we're actually just all about trying to figure out how to make the next 10 minutes work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I actually believe God wants to open the shackles and go, no, check this out. It appears to be a desert, but let me tell you, there is a running river here in this place.
Yeah. And I think that's my sense, just to really get on that, is like, I just so with you, bro. And, not minimizing the suffering, hardship, difficulty of any of this. It's real. It's terrible. And I'm with you. This is not the hand of God bringing judgment on the world. No. This is something that happened in China that is now spread across the world. But God is in the midst of it. And I think there's this almost counter-cultural positioning, indexing, inclination of the Christian in this moment, that in spite of what they see around them, is informed by another voice within them. And when everybody else is shrinking back, I think this is the moment for the church to step forward and trust that when we do, we'll find the manna, There'll be the provision. He's going to give us enough. But we got to have, I think, that audacity to trust him and step out when maybe a lot of people are stepping back, because I think there's that opportunity in the gap there,
the history nerd in me, if we jump back 500 years to give or take the 1600s, when the Reformation took place with Wesley and Calvin and et cetera, we often think that it was just a move of God that took place when Martin Luther did the thing. But if you deep dive a little bit further into the idea that took place there, one of the major structures that actually held that entire thing together was technology. And what not a lot of us actually know is that it was the printing press.
Yeah.
That for the first time, we could actually print tracts of the Bible to hand out to people.
Yeah.
So they translated the Bible into German and then handed it out to each other. So here's a question to your audience, to you, to me, to the people, whoever is listening right now. With the use of technology that we have at our disposal right now, how are we going about reinterpreting the scriptures and the gospel for the time that we find ourselves in right now? We have to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think what's really exciting for me around that is, the printing press made possible the propagation of the gospel in that sense.
Yeah.
Mark Sayers, he writes a lot about, and he's been talking about, him and John Mark Comer, this cultural moment, all that kind of, that school of thought, those guys. He talks about how the Roman road network was the network that enabled the gospel to spread in the time of Paul.
It was the Roman roads. They built the roads.
Exactly. So the infrastructure existed, and then the Spirit hijacked the structure.
Thank you so much for doing the work for us.
Exactly. Yeah. And how now we live in this world where we exist in this global interconnected network of access.
Dude,
how might the Spirit be hijacking it? Yeah.
Yeah, man. We have to be brave enough to step into that world. We have to.
Yeah. And I think what I've been learning from you, Dean, in our conversations, I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine, is to try and understand the digital space as a space in and of itself. Because sometimes what we can do is we can see our phones and our computers simply as a window to the physical world, instead of realizing that the digital world is its own environment. And so when we're starting to think creatively in that space, we actually have to think digitally. So in the same way that if I was going to minister in another continent, I would learn the culture and I would do the missional research, and then I would adapt to be missionally, contextually relevant in that space. So I'm not going to minister in China the same way I'm going to minister in South Africa, because they're different kinds of worlds. In the same way, this world, it's like a new continent that exists, And we're seeing this particularly with Gen Z guys at the moment. Like, there's very little divide in their consciousness and practical terms between the digital space and the physical space. And so how do we enter into that place in a meaningful way that actually builds and is constructive in internet land? Do you see what I'm trying to pick up on, and maybe unpack that a bit?
The digital world, I see more clearly every day through my son, who knows how to use an iPad and knows how to use Siri. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And Daniel is 3. So if I take the necessary steps back to try and see that world from a 33-year-old's point of view, and I take all of that and I go back to the year 2010, to the year 2000, to the 1900s, to the 1800s, to the 1700s, all the way back. And the golden thread that sticks through all of that is the story of grace through Jesus.
Come on. Yeah.
Now, my question is, to each of us once again, is if the form is constantly changing, in other words, if the content is always changing, what is remaining constant?
And that's the story. Or the context?
No, the content.
Okay, so give us the difference in terms of what you mean between content and story there.
So the content of it, from a production point of view, is it can be paper, or it can be a movie, or it can be a whatever. Can be any. So
you're meaning medium there? Our medium. What's our canvas?
Medium that holds the story. Yeah.
Got you. Yeah.
Medium that holds the story there. So for a very, very long time, people used to believe that content is king.
Sure.
In other words, the cameras and the filming and the lights and the $1 billion budgets and the how many books and the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we would all actually believe and be happy with believing that story is actually king.
Yeah. Now again.
That we've all actually walked out of a movie theater that had $1 billion budget and it was terrible. Why?
Yeah.
Because the story was terrible.
Right.
The content was amazing. I mean, like explosions and cars that roll down hills and transformers, but the story was terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my question is, how do we tell that story using what we have right now?
Yeah.
In that digital world, how do we go about translating, dare I say it, as Martin Luther and John Calvin, they had to translate from one medium to the next, from one medium to the next, from one medium to the next. And so how do we go about doing that? And maybe there's a part 2 to this conversation in terms of figuring out what it means to pull those things apart for our contexts and our communities. But that is where the work comes down. That's where the work needs to happen. For each of us, there is going to be a personal experience that takes place. But we have to be brave enough to ask ourselves what that community looks like. And if I may steal something from psychology, and actually stealing this from my wife, is that in psychology there is an idea of when we post anything to social media, we have an imagined audience. So big question that I always ask churches is, who is your imagined audience when you post anything? Is it the believer? Is it the unbeliever? Is it the mature Christian? Is it for growing? Is it for development? Is it for evangelism? Is it for teaching? Is it for training? Is it for inspiration? Is it for invitation? These are ideas that we need to come to grips with as we tell this story, this gospel of grace. So yes, to steal a Casey Neistat quote, we all have the same upload button. Yeah. But we have to be brave enough to figure out who's our community and who's our imagined audience here as we do that.
Yeah. And I think in that sense, bro, you've just absolutely nailed it, because I think the shift that needs to happen, particularly in this sphere of society. So in some ways, I feel like I occupy this sphere a little bit, not to the degree that you do, but I think it's a place that I kind of dabble in, because I think one of my primary roles is to be a storyteller. And the reason I so believe in story is because stories build societies, right? Your family, your life, your city, the world that we live in, these things are informed. They are undergirded by narratives, stories that we draw our ethics out of and our morality out of and build our heroes in, and the telos points, the things our ambitions are built towards. All of these things are the product of story. And so whoever has the best story changes the world. Right? That's the key. And I think what I'm learning at the moment when it comes to communication, media, the digital space particularly, is that we need to shift from simply updating the next status or advertising. And we need to stop thinking about it as some kind of digital flyer, right? What we need to move toward is understanding that this is a medium for narrative. And here's the beautiful thing, I believe, when you talk about imagined audience, we're moving into a world that is going to be in the midst of a deep grief and mourning. There's going to be a lot of mourning. There's going to be a lot of grief. There's going to be a lot of confusion off the back of this. And I think one of the great needs is going to be the need for hope, right? And so the message, we have the best story on the planet ever in all of time as the church. Yeah. And if we have the medium, the existing network of the internet to tell that story, then I just feel like we should be doing everything within our power to get that story into the hands, hearts, minds, and lives of people who are desperately in need of the hope that it carries, you know?
So to go back to that movement thing that you were talking about, instead of meetings, rather moving to, did you say movement?
Yeah.
Meeting,
yeah.
That thing?
That thing, yeah.
Often when it comes to the social media world, I often talk about 3 layers that exist within that world. They're kind of, not that they're degrees of comparison, but they exist simultaneously, but there is a hierarchy that exists within them. And what we do is there's 3 layers. The first layer is invitation. The middle layer is, the first layer is information. The second layer is invitation. And the third layer is inspiration. And those 3 R's very, very simply work together, and they're kind of the degrees of comparison to, like I was saying. So like you were saying there now, often we think that Facebook is just about giving people information. Like here's our church, here's a little bit of information. Or if we kind of take a step down, is it actually just becomes an information board. Come to the next event, or come to the next thing, or we'd love for you to be part of this thing, or come to this thing, or hopefully we'll see you at 8 o'clock at our women's breakfast, or come to this thing, and we'll see you at that thing. No, people don't care, to be honest. Mm. The bottom layer, though, on the other hand, is where inspiration happens. And it takes a powerful story to inspire people to go from one point to another.
Right.
And if we can inspire people, now we're onto something.
That's it. Yeah, it's really good.
And in the social media world, right now, I genuinely believe there are no rules. It is open season, man.
Yeah.
It is open season. And if anything, I actually think we're being a little bit conservative when it comes to this thing.
Yeah.
I actually think we're being conservative.
Yeah. That's good stuff, Dino. We've got to wrap it up. It's been beautiful thoughts. Thank you for sharing. If people want to find stuff, that you've done, if people are inspired by your work, want to get hold of you, find something that you've created, written, made, where could they do that kind of thing?
Yeah, thank you, man. It's Dean Cothill just about everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. deancothill.co.za. Email address is very, very easy. dean@deancothill.co.za. Send me an email. I'd love to assist or help in any way that I can. Had a band at one stage. We did a thing. I wrote a book a very long time ago, which, the more I think about this, Matt, I really hope that we could sit down at some point and deep dive this a little bit. That book that I wrote where I tried to translate the Bible using BBM language for people?
I do. Way ahead of your time there, bro.
How crazy is that, bro?
Yeah, I remember that. That just, if you're listening to this, that just gives you a little insight into Dean's brain. He's always thinking, literally, he's always thinking about that kind of stuff. Like, nobody's thinking about that. And I think you rewrote, you didn't rewrite the whole Bible.
No, just the Gospel of John.
Yeah, into like BBM. If you don't know what BBM is, it was a message platform that used to exist that no longer exists because it didn't adapt quickly enough because it got stuck in the past. That's a thought for you to think about right there.
Like Nokia, yeah. Sorry about that.
There you go. Yeah, bro. Okay, so could they get hold of that book? Is that somewhere they could get it? They could email you.
It's not print anymore. But here's the stupid thing: is I printed it. Makes no sense. Why would you go like technological and then put it on paper?
It's glorious.
I might have the PDF somewhere. Funny enough. So maybe I must find the PDF and do something with it.
Yeah, you should.
I don't know. But yeah, the website and Dean Cothill on all the socials is amazing, man.
Beautiful. And then resources that you can direct people to. What are you listening to, reading right now? What do you watch? What is the stuff that's really inspiring you?
Before COVID, I actually had fasted music for a whole year, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. I love music deeply, but I really have worked hard to try and consume podcasts. That's my kind of go-to. So Carrie Newhoff is a must for me just about every single week. The Hillsong guys have the creative podcast, which comes out on a regular basis. Then I'm trying to keep up to date as much as possible. I'm going to pick up my phone here to see what's kind of loading on my podcast at the moment. I absolutely love what the kind of history part of me enjoys. Pete Enns and the Bible for the Normal People, so they get into a lot of the history and the theology things. And then Instagram is where I kind of go to next. I'm trying to keep up to date with what the world is doing, the Hillsongs and the Elevations. And Hillsong and Elevation, I believe, are really leading the way when it comes to online church things. I think Stephen Furtick and those guys at Elevation are doing incredible things with their eFam. If you can check out their eFam on Facebook, they're releasing lots of resources all the time in terms of how to stay up to date with those things. And that's about my weekly. I hope that answers that question appropriately.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thought to think about in terms of if you find yourself in the sphere of communication, media, etc., be selective about who you follow. And make sure that one of the things I'm learning in a little mantra I'm developing for myself is I want to be a selective follower and a prolific contributor. So I want to share as much with anybody that will listen to the story that I believe is for everybody who can listen. But I want to be selective about the things that are informing my mind because I'm aware that there's just so much noise out there and I don't want to be distracted by all those things. So I would just say, touching on Dean's point there, is that if you find yourself in the sphere and you feel like you're called into this place for kingdom purposes, just be selective about who you're following, and follow guys who are pushing the envelope, but follow guys who are inspiring you, and follow guys who are pulling the best out of you and giving you ideas and fresh perspectives on some things.
Yeah, that's right. It's very good.
Yeah. Cool, guys. Dean, thank you so much for being on the Followerpodcast. It's been really good to have you.
This has been amazing. I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much, bro. Bless you, man.
Hey friends, how you doing? Thanks for watching the video. Before you go, I wanted to ask you to do one more thing. Well, really 3 more things. But before I do, let me tell you why. This over here is you. These dots. Well, really, it's all of us. And this over here, that's the internet. We live in a time which is unlike any in history, really, where we can be connected across the world quickly without even knowing each other. You're watching this video and some of you have never even met me. But one of my convictions is that if the internet matters at all, it has to be about more than just likes, shares, and follows, right? It's got to be about a purpose and a reason. And for me, that reason is community and connection, because whatever we are going to do on this planet, we're going to do it together. So I've been thinking about how do we take this and funnel it down, turn it into that, right? So places of mass first contact into places of community and connection. I'm not really sure how to do that in the big frame, other than to say that I think it starts with steps of connection. So moving past just watching something to actually being involved in something. And so that's why I want to ask you to do 3 things. Number 1, follow this channel and subscribe. Turn on the notifications so you know when the videos are uploaded. That way you can stay connected to what we're doing. Number 2, go to the Instagram account, MattLewis516, because there we put up prayer videos and other material that takes you a little bit deeper into the community where you can slowly become a part of what we're building. Number 3, go to the website, mattlewis.co.za. There you can subscribe to get our quarterly newsletter where you see where we've been and what we're doing and how you can get involved. And you can also get first dibs and new information on events that we're hosting when we can start gathering again together. So those 3 things, the YouTube channel, Instagram, and the website, these are ways that I think we can move from places of first contact toward community and then together toward building the story that God is calling us to write. Thanks so much, guys. Hope to see you soon.